Welcome to Bob's World. Can you believe it's been 50 years in Quincy, 50 years as a professor of art at Quincy University, 50 years as founder and director of the Gray Gallery at Quincy University, and 50 years as a practicing artist. We are here at the Quincy Art Center celebrating the 50 years as an artist. The show I gave the title Inscapes because I'm interested in presenting work from the inside out rather than work from the outside in. I'm standing here before a portrait by a colleague artist of mine from Missouri who asked that I would pose for him for this oil painting. And I told him I would only if I could also be active as an artist. And so I ended up doing a series of 17 drawings of my significant other, Susan Archambault. Rich Bailey is his name. He unfortunately died young in his 60s. He wasn't sure how to finish the painting, but I gave him a suggestion. The last day I modeled there for him, we were out having pizza and we were told that a tornado was coming to Canton, Missouri, and that we should either hide in the bathroom or get out of there as soon as we could. So I drove back to Quincy and he finished the painting, and if you notice in the background is the tornado documenting this actual event that took place during my time there as a model. So hopefully I will share with you my works from 1968 all the way to the current works with some explanations for the work. And as an artist, basically, one of the problems is the feeling of standing here naked and afraid. Naked in the sense that as an artist, most of us do our work isolated in a studio, alone with our thoughts. And then for some reason, we feel the need to put our work out there and expose ourselves to the public, either for gratification or sales or compliments or even sometimes ridicule. I've gotten comments regarding my work like, well, my 5-year-old could do that. And ironically, I'm kind of like what Picasso said. Picasso said that we all are artists as children. The hardest part is to remain a child as we get older. And that's what I've always tried to do, is have that playfulness, openness, and fondness of making new discoveries. The afraid part has to do with when you have a retrospective, you can look back to see where you've been. You could look at where you are now, and then you kind of try to project where you will be. So I'd like to show you the drawings that I did while I posed here for this artist. As I mentioned, as I was modeling for Rich Bailey, I was drawing my friend Sue, and I did about 17 drawings during the 3 times that I posed for that portrait by Rich Bailey. And I selected these 4 to show in my retrospective. These were done in 2003, and they're Conte drawings. And of course, it wasn't so much about, the artist really interprets the subject. They're not a camera. It's not about recording exact details. It's more about the connectedness of the artist to the model or to the subject, that kind of felt emotion that you get as you observe whatever it might be that you're painting or drawing, in this case, Sue. So we have these 4 examples that were done out of the 17 that I did at that time. And so this is Sue for variations. These are the earlier works. These were done in the 60s. And realize that life is a journey, and I'm fortunate enough to have a visual diary of that journey that encompasses people and places. In terms of art art basically is problem solving, or it's seeking the unknown. My earlier works dealt with models. Since I taught drawing, I would always be doing demonstrations of models. I also did my former wife, Mary Beth. And then I reflected on things that I found interesting in nature, like cloud formations and the sun and the moon. And like Kandinsky said, the circle is a perfect form. And so you'll find a lot of circles in my work. And you'll find the rainbow. The rainbow also interested me. So the earlier works reflect that kind of interest of nature, reflected in the kind of abstract universal forms. And over here, as I mentioned, children's art fascinated me. And this painting here is a strong reflection of an artist that I found interesting, was a guy named Mark Rothko. And then the part here that looks like a gestural drawing is basically inspired from a drawing that my son did at a very young age. So I've kind of synthesized those two experiences into one, making it my own kind of painting. So the underpainting has to do with a spray gold enamel, and then the overpainting has to do with oil paints, glazed oil paints, and then the drawing is with past oils. Some people refer to it like a TV, or some think of it like an oven, but I don't mind that interpretation from the viewers. It exists, and it's the viewer can make their own interpretation of the painting. And the works over on this wall start in the 70s, and one of the things that intrigued me was working with spray enamels. And this piece up here, it was inspired by these old metal grids that I would find in these abandoned buildings in Quincy. And I would take those heat grids and use them as stencils, and then I'd work with various ways of spraying with enamel paints from a can. I did that for a while until one time I blew my nose, and then I saw all this stuff coming out of my nose, and I thought, well, that might not be a good thing to work with. So I stopped that and shifted gears and went to another approach. But you could see on this wall that I have a couple examples of the spray enamel stencil process. So in '72, I decided in the summer to rent the educational center from the Quincy Art Center. It happened to be near a shoe store. And as I buried my soul, or so to speak, my loss of my wife, I spent a lot of time in the studio creating art, and was fascinated by these people that came in off the street from getting their shoes fixed, and they were just totally taken back at, wow, what are you doing? You know, what is this going on here? So they took an interest in my work, and I thought that's a neat experience, having just the common folk come off the street and be fascinated by an artist actually working in a studio. But it was that body of work that got me a fellowship to do graduate work at Kent State University in Ohio. And as I'd mentioned before, people and places influence your art. All your life experiences are reflected in your art. So when I went to Kent State, I worked with two internationally famous artists. One was a guy named Milton Resnick, who was probably the last connection to America's first school of art style that was recognized internationally, and that was abstract expressionism. And so I worked with Milton Resnick, who was very passionate about his art, was very concerned about the surface of his art. And so these three paintings actually kind of reflect that experience I had studying with him. And so that fed into my own artwork.
There we go.
While at Kent State, the other famous artist I worked with was Nathan Oliveira, who always stressed gestural drawing, so I did a lot of figure drawings while I was there. But one of the things that really impressed me was the last day he showed work that he did called Monotypes, which was based on an art image by Goya, the Tauromachia series, the Bull series. And I was just blown away that in 2 months he created this body of work which were variations on that image. And that left an indelible mark on me. So when I got back to Quincy, a student came up to me and said, "You always bragged that you can make art out of anything," so he gave me 3 birch plywoods, same size wood blocks. So immediately I thought about, well, I teach printmaking and I teach multiple block color printing, but I don't want to cut all those blocks. So I started experimenting with the idea of doing oil monotypes. And what I did was each block was a primary color. So I had a yellow block, a red block, a blue block, sometimes a black block. And then I came up with these monotypes based on the concept of the oil monotype. And because of that, this piece and another piece got juried into the New American Monotype traveling show from the Smithsonian Institute. And it traveled all over the United States, promoting the whole idea of monotype being a serious work of art. And of course, they had a nice catalog on the show, and I was nicely reproduced across from Robert Motherwell. About 9 metal steel sculptures in 1974. I decided I wanted to explore welding and oxyacetylene, so I took advantage of an adult course at the local high school, and I just told them I didn't want to do hitches or anything like that, but I did want to make sculpture. And I was always fascinated with butterflies, so this was my attempt to do a kind of a profile of a lady with kind of a butterfly sitting on the head. And then the other one had to do with the cloud formations and the rainbow and the heart shape, which related to my earlier works in the 70s. One of the unique things about being a teacher is you could apply for a faculty development grant, which I did, and I continued my research on the oil monotypes by being allowed to work in the print area at the Kalamazoo Art Institute, and at the same time study with another artist that I admired, a printmaker, painter named Harvey Breverman. So this painting may seem odd in the show, but it was in his workshop that I decided to take a break from doing the monotypes and to do a figure study. So he had us do quick gesture figures, oil on paper, and then a serious one on canvas. And one of the advantage of being a professor is that you only have to teach 9 months out of the year, and you can make a choice, teach in the summer or use the summer for your own personal research. And money was not the issue for me. The issue was having time to make my work. So with various faculty grants and having my own summer, I dedicated myself to my work by going to the oldest summer school in the United States called Oxbow, which is now under the umbrella of the Chicago Art Institute. But while at Oxbow, I had the good fortune of working with some well-known artists like Sandra Freckleton, Leon Golub, other artists right now, Keith Acapulco, got to meet or hear Janet Fish. But when I was there, I wanted to challenge myself. As I said, art has to do with problem solving, so I wanted to challenge myself to do drawings, but I wanted to do white drawings, and then some with mixed media. So these are mixed media white drawings, which I call white space or X space, and it involves scratching the white surface, like you see a little X here, putting some thread in here, working with graphite, cutting the edge of the paper, and trying to push the concept of drawing to another level. Experiences then, wherever I go, I'm always training my eye, so I'm always working from the model. While I was at Oxbow, I did a series of watercolors based on the model. So it trains my eye, it trains my observation skills, it helps me see the relationship between the abstract work and the realist work, and then me making the connection between the two. And another experience I had at Oxbow was working with a very significant paper maker named Joe Wilfer, and having been exposed to the thinking of Sam Gilliam, who was also making paper there. So both these pieces that I have on the wall here are Western-made, handmade paper from that experience. And they got exhibited on the gallery at Oxbow along with Janet Fish, who was a visiting artist and a famous artist as well. What's significant about this piece here is that I entered it into a national juried show in New York City, and a woman named Betty Parsons, who discovered Pollock and Klein and people from the abstract expressionist period, juried it into the show and gave out 10 awards, same value of awards, and she awarded me one of the awards for this piece right here. There was an artist there named Ponce de Leon, a New York printmaker, and I didn't really study with him as much as I did with other people, but I heard him making a comment about how to hand color lithographs. And when I got back to Quincy, it occurred to me that I don't want to hand color lithographs, but I would like to print watercolors if I can do that. Because what I became aware of back in 1979 was that watercolor can be reconstituted. So I found some old discarded aluminum plates, and I took tube watercolors and I painted on the plates after I figured out how to adhere the paint to the plates, and let them dry, become bone dry. And then I put damp paper on top of the plate and ran it through a printing press. So this is really the first example in '79 of what I called aquagraphs, water-based prints. And that was the beginning of my journey into doing monotypes. But this is significant because of when it started. Before that, though, when I got back, I did a graph. As an artist, you have to make experiments to see if things will work. So I made a graph of all the techniques I knew about watercolor painting, and then I put it on a test plate and then printed it to see if it would work, and it did work. Plus there's another concept. The first printing is mostly, has great fidelity. The second printing has what we call a residual or ghost print, they call it, because there's not much paint left on it, but enough ghost there that you can rework it. So that became the impetus for me to begin my searching into the monotype process. Besides being a visiting artist at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York, because it was so close to New York, where a lot of the artists were located or taught out there, I was able to take advantage of some opportunities offered at Skidmore College while I was teaching. And one of them was working with a woman named Ann Westerman, who taught the Eastern method of printmaking, which is quite different than the Western method. The Western method uses like t-shirts, cotton, for their paper making. Eastern uses plants, and this is my attempt at making handmade paper using the Eastern method and incorporating fabric and pearl pins into them. So I was pretty pleased with this paper making process, the Eastern method. And again, I do it because I'm interested in it, but I also do it because I'm a teacher and I'd like to share it with my students as well. I found myself not being interested in just straight wet photography, but I wanted to explore other ways or other alternatives to doing photographic images. So when I was at Skidmore, I asked the photographer if I may use his lab to do some experimenting with, and he granted me the permission to work in the lab. Some of his students, though, were kind of shocked that he would allow me to be in the lab alone, mixing chemicals like I did. But anyway, he was impressed with the fact that I came up with a kind of a unique process that he wanted to trade for it, and I call it a chemogram. And up here is a chemogram. It's a photogram and a chemogram combined, and also a photograph, because I found an old negative of the Virgin Mary and the Child, and this is all done with wet photography, wet photochemicals. But the marks here, where I call this past meets present, all these makings here, I use Vaseline on the photographic paper, and then I developed the image, and it came up and it made these fascinating images, along with other things I explored later. But again, I took an opportunity of a place and of a person in order to grow as an artist. So from doing my aquagraphs in 1979, and I continued that process with discarded aluminum plates, by the time I got to the 80s, I decided to find the best way of getting a best print using watercolors. And so I eventually evolved to using a plexiglass plate. And I didn't want to do multiple plate color printing. I wanted to do one printing at a time using a different layering process. In fact, all of my work involves the collage idea or the layering process. One might say a collage kind of space that I work with. So these two monotypes are what I call monotype assemblegraphs. So I paint my materials, which I call my vocabulary, and then I assemble them on the dry plate. Then I print them all at once using the etching press. And that's how I arrived at both of these. This is the only one of two, I think, where I actually used an airbrush on top of the dry paint, which I hope to go back to soon, because I think it adds another dimension to the surface. Another time I'm at Skidmore, they had a visiting artist named Hugh O'Donnell, and he was presenting a life drawing class using etching inks. So what I have here is my use of the etching ink using a live model, again taking a opportunity to work with someone at Skidmore College in New York. So while I was, I got a fellowship to go to the Vermont Studio Center, which you're invited to, and I chose to work in the print department, and I wanted to continue work on my monotype assemblegraphs. While I was there, the printmaker there, Sarah Amos, suggested, why don't I try to do some 4-plate zinc oil monotypes? And so I did a whole series, maybe about 70 of these, and these represent that experience at Vermont Studio, working with oil-based inks on regular copper plates or zinc plate, metal plates, but then figuring out how to register the print 4 times before the paper shrinks. I had the good fortune at Skidmore College not only of meeting these artists, but having dinner, going out to dinner and lunch with them. And this woman from New York is named Getchtoff, and she came out of that era working with the abstract expressionists. And most of her work, she had a show at the gallery there, and it was mostly acrylic paintings with graphite drawings on them. So I thought that was an interesting concept. So this painting here is my attempt at incorporating watercolor and showing more graphite drawing in it. And so you see that there's this graphite shape here that's all done in pencil, and the same right here. Quincy Arts Center invited several artists, commissioned them to do a fundraiser for the membership show, and I was commissioned to do a silkscreen print. So I went up to Michigan and worked with this artist, and I created this river bin image for the Art Center to sell to its memberships. And again, this was based on my experiences in Vermont, because in Vermont, every time I walked over this bridge, I would watch the water doing its daily circular kind of movement going on. And then I always liked the infinity sign. So this image was inspired by the Vermont experience, but then working in silkscreen with this artist in Michigan. And then after we did this commission, he invited me to stay and do a print for ourselves. So I did this print below here as a follow-up on that print. And then he kept an edition for himself, and then I kept my own edition. And so that's why these exist. When I was a young kid, I studied with an artist at the South Bend Arts Center named Joe Robo. When I was in high school, I wanted to take art, but I was told art was for girls. So a secretary told me she was taking an adult watercolor class at the South Bend Arts Center and wondered if I'd want to join them, which I did. And the instructor said, well, I can't stay there and watch them, I have to participate. So I ended up participating with this group of, older ladies, or old ladies. When you're young, they all look old to you. And then we had a critique, and I got stroked for that, and positive comments on it. And then the instructor asked me if I did any drawings, and then he looked at my portfolio, and he said, well, I could teach you color. And then he talked to the director, and because of that, I ended up being part of the South Bend Arts Center, taking ceramics, taking printmaking, taking oil painting, and working with watercolors with Joe Robo, who was a student of Elliot O'Hara's, and being his assistant, teaching as a 15-year-old, teaching these adults how to paint watercolors. And so we went outside and we did what they called plein air painting, which seems to be popular nowadays. But these two paintings are my plein air attempts at painting in Assisi. QU has this nice program of taking students over to Italy and walking in the footsteps of St. Francis and experiencing the same places where he's been. And so that was, while the students were sleeping, I went out with my little watercolor box and painted these on the spot. And I always liked this quote from St. Francis, and I wrote it down here, and I think it's a wonderful quote. St. Francis said, "He who uses his hands is a laborer. He who uses his hands and mind is a craftsman. But he who uses his hands, mind, and heart is an artist." So I always liked that quote from St. Francis. So at another time, I spent close to 19 summers teaching at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York. It was such a great adventure because during the summer, that was the summer home for the New York City Ballet, and that was the summer home for the Philadelphia Orchestra, and it was a summer home for the Writers' Conference there. And of course, the famous Skidmore College Summer 6 program. And again, taking an opportunity to work with people there. I was always fascinated with Raku Pottery. So in 1991, I spent the whole summer making Raku Pottery. And there's so much you could do with it. It's a low-fire pottery process. And you take these hot pieces and you throw them into buckets of sawdust and dirt, and just so you can come up with these beautiful kind of copper blue type glazes that amounts to that. And while I was there at Skidmore, they always had this woman come in from Princeton who was a famous international potter named Toshiko Takazu. And Toshiko Takazu was what they call they give an honorific country statement, like artists of Hawaii or something like that. Well, anyway, she was treated like a goddess there, and I just treated her normally as just a human being. I guess she liked that. And one day she asked me, can you sneak me into the print room and show me how to do your monotype process? And that really flattered me that she was interested in that. The only thing that threw me off was she wanted to do it on black paper. So I had to find a way of showing her how to do the water-based monotype and printing it on black paper. And so we did that for about 5 or 6 summers. But at the end of the time of working with her, when she left, she always left me a nice bowl that she designed that was round and that came to a point, and she left a little ball inside it and you could shake it. But I had no idea of the international recognition of her until I met her at Skidmore College. And actually she fell in love with one of my life drawings, so I had to go to her house and pick out one of her pots in exchange for my drawing. And then my son had the beautiful experience of sleeping the night upstairs at her house with her 5-foot pots all around him, and also had the unique experience of ringing her bronze bells that were in the backyard. So anyway, Skidmore fed into my experiences, which fed into my art. Okay. So I had the good fortune of being a visiting artist at Ball State University to share my printmaking process, monotype printmaking process. And in the evenings, they have life drawing class. So I took advantage of that. Again, like I always said, I draw from life, draw from figures. This piece, again, back at Skidmore College, they brought in a Dan Weldon, who was the inventor of solar plate etching. So I couldn't wait to be able to work with him. And the beauty of the solar plate etching is that you don't use any acids at all. It's just exposing a photosensitive plate to ultraviolet light and then using water to clean out the image. And it has such great fidelity that at times it can look like an etching or a dry point, or in this case, almost look like a lithograph. So my paper colle piece inspired this night passing solar plate etching. The one above is periodically I do what I call Chroma Poems. So maybe some unsuccessful watercolors I'd cut up into smaller pieces and then I'd make them into collages. So they become Chroma Poems. And this one was selected by Chicago Harry Hu artist Carl Worsom to go to Wales. So it was exhibited in Wales along with one of my watercolors. So one day I got bored with always doing the same format, but I have to tell you the format for my watercolors is vertical because I think our vision of life is shaped by doors and windows, and our space is divided that way. So, and I like the idea of verticality as being uplifting. And if you notice, my later works are more colorful, so I guess I'm more happier with my life at this moment than I was back in the 70s when I went through that sad time. So maybe that's why dark colors there and lighter colors here. This is a triptych, and basically what it is I've had some what I considered unsuccessful watercolors. So I cut the watercolors up with the idea of making a triptych and working with a different size shape. So I have 3 of those in the show. So here's one side cut, here's the other one, or no, it's this one, and then this one, and then of course the challenge for the artist is how do you connect all 3 to make it into a whole piece, which would be the sum of its parts. Okay. If you're as fortunate like I was, I won a drawing to go on a cruise, and I didn't think I'd like a cruise, but I fell in love with a cruise. And one of the things I did on a cruise is do these plein air paintings, so we went to Cabo San Lucas. Besides walking on the into the city while I was on the ship, I was able to do these plein air paintings of Cabo San Lucas. So this piece here, it represents again my exploration of working with a photographic process without just doing direct photographs. It was done in 1983, and it's a diptych doing a photogram. So you just place objects on a photosensitive paper and you expose it, and then you develop it into the regular wet photo process. So the real question is, of the three pieces here on the wall, which one came first? So the answer is my monotype. This is a monotype assemblograph using water-based paints, printed on a printing press, plus pushing the idea of not only being involved in the layering process or the collage element look to it, collage space, but also cutting into the space and gluing on top of the space. Then, in this case, again, the monotype fed into the watercolor. So this is the watercolor that was in Watercolor USA show 2017. And it's a variation on the monotype. And then I decided I haven't drawn an abstract drawing in a long time. So I challenged myself to do a graphite drawing, just using graphite, powdered graphite and pencil, and tried to interpret the theme. So this is like what I call theme with variations, in different media. And this is, again, another exploration of an alternative to photography, and this is called a cyanotype. So the paper is very sensitive and it turns blue, and it's like a photogram. So I found some cheesecloth and some feathers and a plastic ribbing and made my composition and then developed it using the basic water, washing it off and exposing the images that way. And this wall represents some aspects of my photographic eye as I look at nature. This is what I call a direct transfer monotype process. What you do is you ink up the plate, you put translucent printmaking paper on top of the plate, and then you observe your model and draw using your hand or using the pencil with various pressures, and you draw the subject matter. So the gray area in the back is using the palm of my hand to get a little bit of the ink there, and the darker areas are created by using a graphite pencil. So this was a demo that I made showing my students how to do the direct transfer monotype process. So again, while at Skidmore College, I had access to the sculpture lab, and I decided rather than paint the illusion of a collage, but still deal with collage space, I thought about using found objects and doing a constructed space using the found objects. So this is an assemblage of found objects that I got around the studio there and assembled into a sculptural piece. So I mentioned the paper collé process where I'm cutting out magazines, gluing them down to come up with ideas, but also sometimes they're an art form in and of themselves. It's a collage method. As I said, I deal with collage space thinking, and I also deal with layering. So here is the paper collé piece that I designed that I came up with that became the impetus for this watercolor up here. It's not a matter of copying it, but using it as a stepping stone to achieve the watercolor. You have to still leave yourself open to working with the media and let the medium carry on a dialogue with the medium in terms of finding a resolution of how this would all come together. And the other two on the sides were also inspired by the paper collé pieces. This one was in the Fabriano show, I believe, last year in Italy. as one of artists to represent the USA. And this one was in a national show, a watercolor show. Another direction I'm thinking about going into with the Monotype series is to do reconstructed monotypes. So I could work with the batch of rejected monotypes that I have and make collages out of them using an interesting gluing process that I now use where you don't have to glue with wet materials, but you use heat. So I use a polymer gloss medium and paint the front side and the back side on both pieces of paper, and then I use like an iron and heat the polymer together, and that holds the image together real well. And if I don't want a glossy surface, then I could have put a matte medium on top of it, and that'll kill the gloss. And how many artists are tempted to try to do a self-portrait? So this wall represents many explorations of my self-portrait in different medium at different times during my lifetime. So I have on the far left an engraving of a self-portrait on a small piece of copper plate that I found. The piece up there was inspired by taking the digital work, Photoshop, and taking a picture of myself and then altering the color and then also inversing it so it looks like a negative and then making it into a diptych and then hand painting it. So the digital world is slowly creeping into the art world. And then below is pure digital art dealing with symmetry. This one is a demo on how to do a self-portrait using the aquagraph method, where it's just straight paint on plexiglass plate and then printed with an etching press. And then these are just directly done from sight, looking at either through a mirror or as reflected in a mirror. So these are done at different times. And this is just a straight black and white woodcut as a demo for my students, done in 2018. These 6 watercolors, I think, best represents me where I'm at the moment. Again, it's a collaged space. It's a window space. It has the feelings of the assemblograph from the Monotypes. It's about color and the experience of moving on the page. The one on the far right top was selected to be featured in, I think it was Splash 11 book. And most of these were award-winning watercolors. And again, they reflect my interest in the layering process and the flat space and the classical tradition of architecture, structure, and the romantic interest in color, in feeling, and intuition. And then the nature somehow becomes part of this, both the nature of me and the nature of nature that I experienced at the time of working alone in the studio. So I'd like to leave you with this one quote that I really like by an artist who is also not only a painter but an outstanding monotype artist. And I got to hear him talk about a series of monotypes that he did for a book called Dante's Inferno by a famous author. And he said, this is what he said: every medium has a surface, and the surface is the message of the medium. He says, the surface carries the work of art and not the subject. Thanks for touring my exhibit, and I hope you have some value from seeing this video. And if you have a chance, look me up, Bob Mejer Monotypes on YouTube, and there's a 55-minute explanation of my water-based monotype process.